Something answered my distress call on the 43rd day. I wish it hadn't. I need to tell this properly, from the beginning, because the beginning is where everything was still ordinary, and ordinary is something I have not felt since. My name is Thomas Ray. I spent 19 years with the Orbital Maintenance Corps, which is a polite way of saying I was a plumber who worked 300 kilometers above the Earth. Nobody writes books about us. We fix coolant loops and replace corroded panel seams on stations that should have been decommissioned a decade ago. We are the men who keep old things running long past the point where they should have been allowed to die. The station was Helios 4, a research outpost that had been cycling through skeleton crews since 2019. Most of its original equipment was older than my marriage by the time I arrived. My partner on that deployment was a man named Dale Cosford. Good man. Quiet in the way that useful people are quiet, the way a wrench is quiet. He did his work and expected nothing in return except the satisfaction of a system that functioned properly. We had done 2 rotations together before, and I trusted him the way you trust someone who has held your tether while you hung over the naked curve of the planet. The first 3 weeks passed the way they always did. We replaced thermal shielding on the port array. We swapped out a water reclamation filter that had been limping along since the previous crew reported it. We logged our maintenance reports and ate our meals in the observation module, because the view of the Earth turning below us never stopped being worth looking at, even after all those years. Dale was not a talker, but sometimes he would pause with his fork halfway to his mouth and just watch the planet for a while, and I would watch him watching it, and neither of us needed to say anything about what we felt. On the 21st day, Dale went to investigate a pressure irregularity in the storage module. The interior hatch seal had been flagged as degraded during our pre-deployment inspection, rated as non-critical, low priority. The kind of repair that goes on the list and stays on the list until someone gets around to it, and sometimes nobody ever does. I was in the communications bay when I heard the alarm, not the soft advisory chime that means a sensor needs recalibrating. The other one. The one that reaches into your chest and squeezes. Rapid depressurization storage module. By the time I reached the corridor, the hatch had buckled inward from the pressure differential, and the module beyond it was open to vacuum. Dale was in that module. I sealed the corridor. I sat on the floor outside that hatch, my back against the wall, my knees drawn up, and I stayed there for a very long time. I will not describe what the camera showed me. I will say that there is a particular kind of silence that fills a place when you become the only living thing in it. It is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of something else, something heavy and close, like a damp cloth held over your nose and mouth. You breathe, and the station breathes with you, its air recyclers cycling and whirring, and neither sound offers any comfort at all. Mission Control was informed. They were sympathetic in the careful, measured way that people in control rooms are always sympathetic. They were also, as it turned out, unable to send a retrieval crew for at least 6 weeks. Budget limitations. Scheduling conflicts. The polished, regretful language that means you are not important enough to rearrange the calendar for. I understood. I had always understood where I sat in the hierarchy. Maintenance workers wait. It is the one thing we are exceptionally good at. So I waited. The first week alone was manageable. I clung to routine the way a drowning man clings to driftwood. I ran system diagnostics every morning. I maintained the water recyclers, exercised on the stationary cycle, recorded voice logs that no one would ever listen to, but that gave me the small comfort of hearing my own voice bounce off the walls. The station made its usual noises around me. Thermal expansion in the hull panels. The rhythmic thump of the air processor switching cycles. The soft, almost organic groan of metal flexing against the temperature gradient between sun-facing and shadow-facing surfaces. I cataloged each sound. I named them. I made them mine. By the second week, the sounds were no longer enough company. I noticed something I initially dismissed. The station's internal sensors logged a temperature fluctuation in the sealed storage module. The one where Dale had died. The one that was open to hard vacuum, where the temperature should have been a constant and unchanging negative 270 degrees. A spike of 2 degrees, lasting 11 seconds, then a return to baseline. I checked the sensor logs 3 times. The reading was there, precise and unambiguous. I told myself the sensor had been damaged during the depressurization event. That was the logical explanation, the only explanation that made mechanical sense. I logged the anomaly and moved on. On the 19th day alone, I heard tapping. Faint, rhythmic, deliberate. Coming from the direction of the sealed corridor. It lasted about 40 seconds, then stopped. I floated down the corridor and pressed my ear against the sealed hatch. Nothing. Just the low hum of the air recyclers pushing atmosphere through ducts that no longer needed to serve 2 people. I told myself it was a loose panel vibrating in the airflow. Stations accumulate small noises the way old houses do. A new sound is not an event. It is a symptom of age. It happened again 2 days later. Same rhythm, same duration, same location. As if something on the other side of that hatch was keeping time. On the 25th day, I stopped eating at regular intervals. Not deliberately. I would simply forget, lost in the business of listening. The station had become a different place after dark, when I dimmed the lights to simulate nighttime. In the reduced illumination, the familiar geometry of the corridor shifted. Shadows gathered in corners where I had never noticed corners before. The ventilation ducts whispered to each other in a language that almost, but not quite, resembled speech. On the 29th day, I stopped sleeping through the night entirely. Not because of nightmares. Because of the certainty that something was watching me. There was no rational explanation for this feeling in an empty station, and I knew that as clearly as I knew the chemical composition of the air I was breathing. But knowing that a thing is irrational does not make the thing stop. I would wake at what my schedule said was 3 in the morning, and lie rigid in my sleeping bag with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling, listening to the station breathe, feeling absolutely certain that something in the darkness was listening back. I increased my communications with Mission Control. They were patient. They used phrases like isolation stress and anticipated psychological response. They reminded me that my retrieval window was being arranged. They asked if I wanted to speak with a counselor. I declined. A counselor would have told me what I already knew, that prolonged solitude in a confined environment produces predictable neurological effects, that the human brain is not designed for aloneness, that the noises and the sensation of being observed are well-documented phenomena. A counselor would not have explained the handprint. I found it on day 35. It was on the interior surface of the observation module window, pressed into a thin film of condensation. The kind of mark a warm palm leaves on cold glass. I held my own hand up to it. The fingers extended a full 2 centimeters beyond mine. Dale had large hands. I remembered that clearly. I remembered watching those hands work a socket wrench with a precision that bordered on tenderness. I cleaned the print. I told myself I had made it myself during a sleep-deprived fugue, that the size difference was an optical distortion caused by the curvature of the glass, that the condensation was an artifact of humidity, fluctuations in the air recycling system. These were reasonable explanations. I repeated them to myself, the way you repeat a prayer, when you are no longer certain anyone is listening. On day 38, the tapping returned. This time it came from outside the hull, something striking the exterior of the station, 400 kilometers above the surface of the Earth, where nothing should have been close enough to make contact. I checked the external cameras. The feed showed empty space. Stars. The slow, luminous curve of the planet turning below. No debris field. No satellite. No micrometeorite trail. Nothing that could have made the sound I was hearing. The knocking continued for 3 minutes and 12 seconds. I counted everyone. Then it stopped, abruptly, the way a person stops knocking when the door opens from the other side. On day 41, I broke protocol and sent a distress call on the emergency broadband frequency. I reported equipment malfunctions and psychological deterioration and requested immediate extraction. Mission Control responded within the hour. They said they were escalating my case. They said a crew was being assembled. They told me to hold on. On day 43, something else answered. The proximity alert pulled me from a thin, restless sleep. A vessel was approaching the station on a trajectory that had not been announced by ground control. It did not appear gradually on the radar, the way approaching ships do, growing from a distant blip into a defined signature. It was simply there, already close, already decelerating, as if it had been holding position nearby and had only just decided to make itself known. I hailed the vessel on the standard frequency. The response came back instantly, not quickly. Instantly. No signal delay, no communication lag, no pause for the radio waves to cross the distance between us. The voice was male, calm, professional. It had a quality I could not immediately name, but that unsettled me. Each word was perfectly articulated, evenly spaced, as if the sentences had been assembled rather than spoken. The voice identified the vessel as rescue ship Adara, and stated that they had received my distress signal and were preparing to dock. I requested authorization codes. Every rescue operation carries them. It is not optional. They transmitted codes that were perfectly formatted, correctly sequenced, and cryptographically valid. And yet, they were codes I had never encountered before. Not wrong. Not expired. Simply unfamiliar in a way that felt manufactured, as if someone had studied the template and produced a flawless copy without ever having held an original. The Adara docked at the port coupling in under 20 minutes. The docking was flawless. No correction burns. No alignment adjustments. No scraping of metal on metal. The vessel coupled to the station the way a hand slides into a glove that was made for it. I had watched hundreds of docking procedures in my career, performed dozens myself. I had never seen one that smooth. The airlock cycled. I waited on the station side of the connector tube, floating in zero gravity, watching the inner hatch indicators shift from red to amber to green. 3 people came through. 2 men and a woman. They wore standard EVA undersuits. Their faces were clean-shaven, their expressions warm and open. The woman spoke first, greeting me by my first name. Thomas. Not Commander Ray. Not Mr. Ray. Thomas, as though she had known me for years. I told myself she was being deliberately informal to put me at ease. A de-escalation technique. Something they teach in training. I had learned the same protocols. It made sense. I asked how long until departure. She told me they could leave immediately, that my belongings had already been accounted for. I had not given them an inventory. I had not told them what I needed to bring. They had been aboard my station for less than 2 minutes. The taller of the 2 men offered me his hand. I took it. His grip was firm and his skin was the right temperature, but the texture was wrong. Smooth in a way that human skin is not. Not soft, not rough. Simply uniform. Like something that had been engineered to approximate the feel of a palm without ever having grown from living cells. I released his hand. The woman asked if everything was all right. The way she said my name again, Thomas, it sounded rehearsed, like a shape her mouth had learned to make but had never needed to make until today. I told them I needed a few minutes to collect my personal items. All 3 of them nodded. Not approximately at the same time, the way people do when they agree. Exactly at the same time. Simultaneously. As though they shared a single nervous system. I went to the communications bay and attempted to contact Mission Control. The connection was dead. Not filled with static, not interrupted by interference. Dead the way a wire goes dead when someone has cut it cleanly at the source. Nothing where something should have been. I floated there, suspended in the silence, and I understood something I did not want to understand. These people had not come in response to my distress call. The call had served a different purpose. It had confirmed my location, or my isolation, or my willingness to open the door. Whatever they were, they had been waiting, and my signal had told them I was ready. I returned to the connector tube. The three of them stood in a line facing the hatch I emerged from. They had not moved. They had not spoken to one another. They had simply oriented themselves toward the direction I would return from and waited with the patience of something that has never been in a hurry. The woman stated that I was ready. It was not a question. The interior of the Adara was wrong. Not obviously, not in any way I could have pointed to and said there. That is the problem. Wrong the way a room is wrong in a dream, where every object is present and properly placed, but the proportions are slightly off and the light comes from nowhere. The control panels were where they should have been, but the labels were printed in a typeface I did not recognize. The seats were the right shape, but the material was something I had never touched, neither fabric, nor leather, nor polymer. The air smelled clean. Too clean. Like atmosphere that had never passed through lungs. I sat where they indicated. The restraints closed around me without my touching them. They fastened snug and precise, as if the seat had measured my body while I stood and adjusted itself accordingly. The woman told me the transit would take approximately 6 hours and that I should rest. 6 hours. A standard re-entry from Helios 4's orbit takes roughly 90 minutes. 6 hours meant we were not descending. It meant we were going somewhere else, or approaching the Earth by a route that no human flight plan would ever specify. I asked where we were landing. She said one word. Home. I did not sleep. I watched the three of them operate the vessel. Their movements were fluid, precise, and completely silent. They never spoke to one another. No status calls, no coordination, no idle conversation. They worked in perfect synchronization without any visible communication. Three extensions of a single intelligence performing different tasks toward the same end. Through the viewport, I watched the stars drift. The constellations were correct, but their movement was wrong. We were not descending. We were moving laterally across the face of the planet, at an altitude I could not determine, toward something I could not see. At the 4-hour mark, the taller man turned in his seat and looked at me. He did not speak. He simply looked, and in his eyes I saw something I can only describe as the expression of a collector examining a specimen that has finally been secured. Not malice, not curiosity. Satisfaction. I asked him his name. He said a word. I cannot tell you what it was, because it did not remain in my memory. It passed through my mind like smoke, leaving no trace. I asked again. He repeated it. The same thing happened. The name existed for the instant he spoke it, and then ceased to exist, as though my brain had been given something it was not equipped to hold. I stopped asking. At the 5-hour mark, the ship began its descent. Through the viewport, the Earth grew larger, the atmosphere thickening into a luminous blue haze along the horizon. It looked right. It looked exactly right, and that was what frightened me most. It looked perfect. No storm systems churning over the oceans. No light pollution bleeding from the continents. No contrails. No satellites catching the sun. No evidence of 7 billion lives being lived below. An immaculate Earth, unmarked and undisturbed, like a painting of a planet rather than the thing itself. We landed in a field. Grass, green and damp, stretching to a distant tree line under a sky the color of clean water. The air that flowed through the open hatch smelled like rain and turned soil and something sweet I could not identify. Birds were singing somewhere in the trees. A stream ran over rocks nearby, the sound clear and musical and absolutely convincing. It was the most beautiful place I had ever seen. And I was more frightened than I had ever been. They walked me to a transport vehicle and drove me to a facility that resembled a hospital. Clean quarters, soft lighting, quiet rooms. A room had been prepared for me. It had a bed with sheets that were exactly the right weight, a desk, a window overlooking the green field. There were clothes in the closet, my exact size. Books on the shelf that I recognized, titles I had loved and not thought about in years. My favorite brand of coffee was in the small kitchen alcove, and the mug beside the machine was white with a blue stripe around the rim. I knew that mug. I had owned it as a child. It had broken 20 years ago when I knocked it off the counter, and I had swept the pieces into the trash and not thought about it again until this moment. They knew everything. A woman who presented herself as a doctor came to examine me. She was thorough and gentle. She told me my vitals were normal, that I had been through an ordeal, and that recovery would take time. I asked where I was. She said the same word the woman on the ship had used. Home. Not a location, a verdict. That night, I lay in the bed that was exactly the right firmness, under sheets that smelled like the laundry detergent my mother had used when I was a boy, and I stared at the ceiling and listened. Not the silence of a building where people sleep, with its small shufflings and breath sounds and the creak of someone turning over. The silence of a place where nothing was alive. A silence with weight and texture and presence pressing against the walls from the other side. I got out of bed. The door to my room was unlocked. The corridor beyond was empty, lit by a soft, directionless light that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. I walked to the end of the hall and found an exterior door, also unlocked, as though they had no need for locks, as though leaving was not a possibility that concerned them. The field stretched out beneath a dome of stars. The air was warm. The grass was wet against my bare feet. I walked toward the tree line, and as I walked, I noticed something that made me stop in the middle of that beautiful, impossible field. There were no insects, no moths spiraling around the light behind me, no crickets singing in the grass, no mosquitoes landing on my exposed skin. The birdsong I had heard earlier was gone. The stream was silent. The entire landscape was a perfect reproduction, accurate in every visible detail, and completely devoid of the tiny, innumerable things that make a real place real. I turned back toward the facility. In the window of my room, someone was standing, a silhouette, tall and motionless, watching me with the patience of something that has no concept of time. They did not step back. They did not turn away. They simply watched. The way a thing watches when it has no reason to hide, because hiding has never been necessary. I went back inside. I went to my room. The figure was gone. The bed was still warm. On the fourth day, they told me I was being transferred. Two of them escorted me to a helicopter, and from there, a plane took me to Houston. The plane had other passengers. Real passengers, human passengers, people who coughed and fidgeted and smelled like stale coffee and synthetic fabric. I sat among them and listened to their small, messy, imperfect sounds, and I wanted to weep with gratitude for everyone. At Houston, I was debriefed by a team that was real. I could tell because they were disorganized and slightly irritable, and one of them had a mustard stain on his tie. They informed me that I had been rescued by a rapid response crew dispatched from the Johnson Space Center. They showed me official documentation. Crew names, vessel designations, mission timelines, everything stamped, signed, filed. All of it legitimate. None of it matched what I had experienced. I described the Adara. No vessel by that name existed in any registry they could access. I described the 3 crew members. No personnel matching those descriptions were employed by the agency or any contracting organization. I told them about the facility, the field, the silence. They took notes. They used phrases like perceptual distortion and cognitive effects consistent with prolonged isolation. They did not believe me. I had not expected them to. I was released and I went home. My wife met me at the door and held me for a long time. The house smelled like garlic and lemon because she had made the chicken dish she always made when she was worried. Everything was real. Everything was cluttered and imperfect and gloriously, unmistakably alive. For 3 weeks, I almost convinced myself that the Adara had been a hallucination, that my damaged, lonely mind had manufactured an elaborate narrative to fill the void left by 43 days of solitude. It was a comforting explanation. I wanted it to be true. Then I found the mug. The white one with the blue stripe. The one from my childhood? The one that had shattered on the kitchen floor 20 years ago. It was sitting in the back of my cabinet, behind the everyday cups, clean and unchipped, as if it had never been broken. I picked it up. It was warm. Not from hot liquid, not from sitting in sunlight. Warm from the inside, radiating a gentle heat through the ceramic, the way a living thing radiates warmth through its skin. A warmth that had no source, and no explanation, and no right to exist. I put it back. I closed the cabinet. I have not opened it since. That was 11 months ago. I retired from the Corps. I have not told anyone the full account of what happened until now. My wife says I seem different. Quieter. She is not wrong. I am quieter because I am listening. Every night, after the house goes still and my wife falls asleep and the neighborhood settles into darkness, I hear it. Faint. Rhythmic. Deliberate. The same pattern from the station. The same tapping that started on the 19th day and followed me through vacuum and atmosphere and 300 kilometers of empty space to find me here, in my home, in my bed, in my life. It comes from inside the walls. I lie in the dark. I listen to it. And I wait for the night. It stops. Because I think when it finally stops, that will mean it no longer needs to knock. It will mean the door is already opens.